Hi, I'm Ethan Wong, and today I'm speaking with Susan Wheeler.
Hi, I'm Susan Wheeler, and I started out writing poems when I was very, very young, probably 6 or 7, as soon as I started writing, and always figured that I would do it on the side. Once I figured out that poetry was not exactly a profession by which one could earn a living. And but halfway through my life, I started teaching after my first book came out, and I've been teaching ever since. And most recently, for the past 20 years at Princeton University.
Let's just get into it then. And something I want to ask you, which I think, given the background you've already kind of elaborated on, must have must be kind of an answer that you develop, but also one that had like initial reaction, which is what is special to you about poetry? Because, and what I mean by that is, I'm sure at an early age there was a certain answer that is a bit harder to grasp, but then over time you might have developed that answer.
Uh-huh. Well, I think what initially drew me was a sense of wordplay, the sound of it, and the fact that it seemed to do things in a short space that other things took, whole books to do. Um, I love the feelings that I got, the variety of feelings I got when I read poems. I love the window into other people's brains. I grew up in a family and for which I was really relieved and grateful to find that there were other kinds of brains in the world. So that was always a joy. What's special about it, and sort of early on, I decided, and I'm not sure how much I still believe this, so this is an interesting question to ask me right now. But I always felt that if I wanted to argue a point, I would write an essay. And if I wanted to tell a story, I would write a story. And that poetry did something else. It gave me an experience that, for instance, fiction, oftentimes the period it describes or the narrative takes place over a very long time frame, much longer than it takes you to read the book. But with poetry, all of its traditional devices and many of its sensations are designed to sort of fold time in on itself and give you a sense of immediacy and immediate experience that seemed different than any other verbal art form that I could find. Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, I definitely resonate with that because there are parts of me which take to poetry in a certain moment because it feels the most accessible to be able to go, well, I want to capture just this emotion or just this moment. And oftentimes it feels that if I took on any other form, I would have to give a lot more context to that moment in order to just get to the moment. But with poetry, it's more of, well, here's the moment. I'll just write about this moment, and that's all I have to do.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, we don't have to do any of the drudgery.
Yeah. And something kind of branching off of that then would be, what kind of themes do you like to explore in your poetry? Everyday life or stories, or what kind of stuff do you think?
It often bubbles up from the start of the poem itself. I I often find out what I'm dwelling on, what I'm obsessed with at the moment, um, by how a poem unfolds. It, I think I have set out to write thematic poems in the past, and usually they feel like I'm illustrating the theme or I'm illustrating the idea. They don't feel very exciting. They're a little wooden, and so the way that I generally work is, a phrase will be rattling around in my brain, and I'll put it down, and it'll start to accrue other kinds of phrases, and gradually what what I'm thinking reveals itself to me, if that makes sense. Is that how
Yeah,
you work? Or
it depends, but there are times where it all comes from a phrase. I'll just be walking around and then a phrase pops into my head. And once I start writing that down, it kind of fills itself in terms of everything else coming in there. And sometimes I don't even know where it's coming from. It just kind of goes out like that. And I have to mentally put the pieces together to figure out what I'm even trying to talk about. But yeah, I see.
Mhm. Exactly. I can't remember who it was, but someone once said about a novel that before you write the first word of a novel, you have an infinite set of possibilities. But as soon as you write the first word, and definitely as soon as you write the first sentence, your possibilities are just this tiny, tiny hallway. So that's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah. And since we talked about those phrases coming into your head and everything branching off from that, I guess my question would be, what gets that phrase into your head in the first place? What kind of is the instigator?
God knows. I have no idea. It happens. I'll be walking, I'll be sitting doing something else, something really boring, and it'll happen. It, yeah, I've never figured that out exactly how that happens. And lots of times, it won't be a moment that I can kind of follow it through. So I'll write it down, and sometimes later it still catches a spark. And sometimes I look at it and go, boy, that's a dud. So,
Yeah. And it's odd to me because I think there's a lot of people out there who kind of differ in this. There's people who say, well, I can just write from specific events, or I can just, it's always putting myself down to write. But to a large extent, I've always felt as if a lot of my work comes from just sudden inspiration in that I don't really know what's going on and I just feel like I need to write in the moment. But there also lends itself to a problem of inconsistency for me because often I don't get that like sensation very often for stretches of time. And so if that is true for you, how do you deal with that?
hmm. Well, that's a good question because I've been writing less over the past couple of years than I ever wrote before. And some of it is due to circumstance, just some demands that, don't give me a lot of room. But um, yeah, I don't know. I try to make myself sit down and at least free write and see if there's anything that comes out of that. But I am somebody, it's hard for me to write a poem in between meetings or in between classes, say, because I have to kind of turn my head completely upside down to get that part of me going. And once it starts going, I just drop the threads of anything else. So, for instance, during a semester, I would never answer an email if I was really writing up a storm. So, I've always tended to write in blocks here and there where there's room to get into that head and stay there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned kind of teaching, and that actually interested me because you saying that teaching is a completely different headspace. Well, then for you, kind of how do those kind of interact, like teaching creative writing and at the same time doing creative writing? Because what is that curriculum? If the curriculum is also writing, in what sense, I guess, do those differ so drastically for you?
Well, they're completely different activities in some respects. When I'm writing, I'm only responsible for the page in front of me. And when I'm teaching, I'm responsible for, all of the students who are in my workshops. And they're, developing their writing process and sort of figuring out what they want to do and how they want to do it. And almost like acting like a midwife or something instead of the person who's actually having the baby. And I've tried actually doing along with them assignments that I give them. But again, I'm in too much of the responsible mode to jump in and kind of let myself go. And so they're very different, although I'm often inspired by students and inspired by their work. And I love learning stuff from them. So that's the selfish and the sort of art feeding part of me, because you need to put in input to get output. So yeah.
Yeah. And actually, what also interested me just thinking about it was when you have to give feedback on your students' work, kind of what mindset would you put yourself in? Because would you think about it as to if it was one of your pieces and you were giving feedback or editing your own work, or kind of you separate yourself there too? And then if you do separate yourself, that also begs the question, do you ever come across a point where you give feedback and then you also end up later applying it to your own work?
Huh. Probably. I've never sort of pinpointed it, but I'm sure I have, I'll read a few lines in which there's no real actor in them, and I'll think, there really should be. It'd be a lot more dynamic, and I'm sure I've had similar feelings about lines that students have written as I do my own, as I self-edit. But with each student, their enterprise is different. So it's also a kind of, you have to really work with them so that you know where they're trying to get to and what terms they're using, because they might be really, really different than what I'm working with my poems, with my limited knowledge. And so to apply their own terms. So it's a very different process for each student and even each poem often. Um, yeah, does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I've always found it difficult because when the few times that I've looked at work or people have come to me to ask for advice on work or whatever, I'm I look at it and the only lens that I've found so far to analyze it is as if I wrote the poem. And I often feel that it doesn't really help for me to give feedback in the same way as if I had written the poem because we're looking for different things. And the kind of even the perspective we are coming at it from is completely different. So I could give all the feedback for my poem from my perspective, and it could come out in a way that is just totally mismatched to their ideas. And I think that's something I'm still continuing to develop. in terms of
Right.
trying to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. It's really hard. And of course, I'm sort of kidding myself if I think that I'm doing it from all these different perspectives. Um, but I always give the disclaimer, I was taught in this one tradition. There are many traditions. I read widely, but I need to know from you where you want to get to, and then I'll try my best. I have read a lot of poems over my life, and I'll try my best to get you there or to help get you there. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've got the idea down pat. So, and so, one last question before we can get into the poem reading, which is, I know you said you started writing poetry from a very young age, but I think this is a mental thing that I know a lot of people deal with, which is, what's the point where you started thinking of yourself as a poet?
Hmm. Ooh. I guess probably I started thinking of myself as a writer, I think, in high school. Because even in high school, I had a lot of English classes and a lot of, well, a number of workshops in high school. It was a weird time in high school education in the country. And but in college, I pretty much focused on poetry, and I worked with three very different poets one-on-one, as well as in workshop settings. And yeah, that was probably the point where, I knew it was really poetry. I've written one novel, but never again. It was, I might as well have been building a bridge or something. I had no idea what I was doing. So never. Um, so yeah, probably then.
Yeah, I think being able to kind of realize that path at that point is pretty amazing, just to kind of follow that so closely. So,
When did you?
I mean, I guess it was kind of hard to say because even when I got the National Student Poet thing, I was very uncertain myself. I was thinking in my head, but really? I don't know. But I think just meeting a lot of poets over the past year and just talking to all sorts of people who just enjoy poetry, I think I kind of realized that the title poet is in some ways arbitrary. So just knowing that, oh, I like to write poetry, I like to read poetry, and I'm within this community of all these people who do the same thing has just been a comfort to me. And I think that's the main thing that I developed this past year.
Mhm. It's a good community to be part of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're probably the most supportive people that I've come across thus far. It's just really nice to talk to other people in the community, and it almost never feels like maybe with other things it would be difficult to reach out. It just feels very accessible in all those kinds of ways.
Mhm. Yeah. Poets.
Yeah. So if you're good, we can get into the poems.
Sure. I'll read you a couple of recent ones. Can I swear?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure if there is, but there often is. So I just
Mhm.
wanted to make sure before I went ahead. Um, This is probably the most recent complete one. In a time of just rectification. In a time of just rectification, I come to you from the body of the usurpers. The slaughter in its wake, our wake, we slept through. We spurred on the horse pulling the handgun on its cart of hard plastic. We smiled, we waved. So I come to myself giving up what is oldest. Dr. Seuss, pancakes for Paul Bunyan. From the next room, Stan Kenton. I give up the girders, pound, his friend Tom, the mad John making his dreams 13ers. I give up my mother, my uncle, my father. I give like Hergus Hare Esquire the boot, Ms. Stein. The insurance man knocks, I don't answer. I refuse the electrician his job, douse the driver with Kendrick. Give up the lover who disses the loud girls. Each shreds as it exits, the ravelings catch in my throat and I swallow. Remains remain, my fellow trespassers shrug. Why not? Baby with the bathwater, free speech. This tender time makes fissures from any fault I hold on to. This tender, tender time. Here's one. I've got another one with a lot of repetition in it. I seem to be on an anaphora kick. So this is called Nickeled and Dimed. This is how to sustain it. It's got a nod to Elizabeth Bishop in it. This is how to sustain it. Lose some money, the house. Lose, say it, the art. Lose an ocean of time. Lose the faith of a friend, of a foe, of yourself. Lose your voice for a few torpid months. Lose your shit on the phone with Verizon. Lose your patience, your daddy, the baby, your mom. Break your fall with your finger, break your finger, a foot, your unremarkable heart. Break your back to be on time, then break out of jail. Go when you shouldn't, break when you should. The sickle you'll break at the start of the harvest. Break the chain letter that broke the sad news. Leave the land of your peoples. Time and again, you'll be stopped at the airport attempting return. Leave your senses, leave your love and their lover. Leave the parent you were for the mute you've become. Leave lucky pants in Detroit on a hanger in a Holiday Inn that left you in tears. Gain diagnoses, mono, the black dog, nodes on your larynx, dengue fever disguised as the mumps, a sty, a tumor, one zigzagged crack, sense poorly mended. Gain a few jobs, misgivings, a stone, pound on the door of a neighbor who's fallen, gain time just to lose it, a third mouth to hear. Try to make headway before the stiff headwind that hands you a punch as you rise to your feet. Try the pate, try praying. If faith in the group head is your thing, try that. Try loosening the laces, try tightening your grip. Try to let go of your quest for the perfect. Good, now, passable, worst. Go to the basement, go get the sharp scissors, go under the knife twice, then again, until it gets the job done. Go to Tangiers, go get them in Accra, go to the head of the class and then freeze. With any luck, you'll sustain this a decade. Go to the window as the towers come down. Begin the retreating, beginning with bikes. When the chop shop floods, begin to bail water until 10 years in, the bucket's a sieve. Begin at the top or the coda. Both will start you to stop you in sludge. Begin the prescription, infusions, begin repairs to the woodshed that the belt will undo the first time you take you back into its dark. Begin again, begin over, to rant, to break down, to lose it, to shout. The pieces you abandon, begin to forget them. The end of the tunnel is lit. Begin to prepare.
Thank
There
you.
are a couple.
Those were great. And I think hearing you talk about wordplay at the beginning, I really see it, or I should say hear it in your poems. And I don't know, that's definitely a part of poetry that I appreciate a lot, because it's not really like you can just burst out into wordplay in the middle of normal fiction or in an essay or anything like that. It's kind of reserved. Poetry has that somewhat reserved in its space. So
Yeah,
thank you for that.
you're very welcome.
And before we go, do you have any closing words of advice for any writers or poets specifically?
Yeah, read a ton and separate the writing process from the editing process. Write as much as you can and tell that voice that comes in and wants you to change a word the minute you've got it down to hold on, you'll get to it and come back later. But make sure you get whatever you've got down first and then go back and let the critical side of you take hold. But read old stuff, new stuff, anything you can get your hands on.
Yeah, thank you so much.